At the dawn of the 19th century, Europe was a powder keg. An ancient order of kings and empires, shaken to its core by revolution, was about to be consumed by a storm of ambition, ideology, and war on an unprecedented scale. For over a decade, the continent would become the chessboard for one of the most brilliant, controversial, and captivating figures in human history. This is the story of how one man's destiny redrew the map of a continent, forged nations in the crucible of battle, and left a legacy that haunts the world to this day. 130 to 630. Our story begins not on a battlefield, but in the chaotic heart of post-revolutionary Paris. The French Revolution had devoured its own, leaving a power vacuum filled with a corrupt and ineffective government known as the Directory. The people craved stability. The army craved a leader. They found both in a young, phenomenally successful general, fresh from campaigns in Italy and Egypt, Napoleon Bonaparte. In November 1999, in a daring coup d'etat, he seized power, effectively ending the revolution and becoming the most powerful man in France. But the old monarchies of Europe, Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, saw him as a dangerous upstart. He was the living embodiment of the revolution they sought to crush. To secure his rule and France's position, Napoleon knew he needed more than political power. He needed a title that would place him on equal footing with the ancient dynasties he sought to humble. On December 2, 1804, in a moment of breathtaking audacity, Napoleon did not wait for the Pope to crown him. He took the crown and placed it on his own head, and then on the head of his wife, Josephine. But his ambitions were not merely symbolic. He unleashed a whirlwind of reforms, creating a central bank, reorganizing education, and instituting his masterwork, the Napoleonic Code. This legal framework, a synthesis of revolutionary ideals and authoritarian order, would be one of his most enduring legacies. But to his rivals, it was just another tool of conquest. By 1805, they had seen enough. Britain, Austria, and Russia formed the Third Coalition. Their goal? To march on Paris and remove Napoleon from power for good. The Elephant and the Whale, 630 to 1130. Napoleon's first move was to eliminate his most persistent and powerful enemy, Great Britain. He assembled a massive army on the coast, poised for an invasion. But an invasion was impossible without control of the sea, and the sea belonged to the Royal Navy, Britain's wooden walls. On October 21, 1805, off the coast of Spain at Cape Trafalgar, the decisive naval clash occurred. The British fleet, under the command of the brilliant and beloved Admiral Lord Nelson, engaged the combined French and Spanish navies. Nelson's unorthodox tactic, smashing through the enemy line in 2 columns, led to a catastrophic defeat for France. Britain lost no ships. France and Spain lost 22. Nelson himself was mortally wounded at the height of his triumph, but he had secured Britain's naval supremacy for the next century. The invasion was off. While his navy was being annihilated, Napoleon, with stunning speed, marched his army east to confront the Austrians and Russians. He was furious and about to unleash his fury on the continent. On December 2, 1805, the first anniversary of his coronation, Napoleon faced the combined armies of Emperor Francis I of Austria and Tsar Alexander I of Russia near the village of Austerlitz. He was outnumbered, so he laid a trap. He deliberately weakened his right flank, tempting the Allies to attack and cut him off from Vienna. The Allies took the bait. As their troops descended from the Pratzen Heights to envelop his right flank, they fatally weakened their own center. At the decisive moment, Napoleon ordered his main force to storm the now empty heights, splitting the Allied army in two. "One sharp blow, and the war is over," he said. It was a masterpiece. The Allied army was routed, their forces shattered. Austerlitz is still considered one of the greatest tactical victories in military history. The Third Coalition collapsed. Trafalgar had proven Britain ruled the waves. Austerlitz had proven Napoleon was the undisputed master of the land. The stage was set for a long, grinding war between the elephant and the whale. The high tide of empire, 1130 to 1630. In the years after Austerlitz, Napoleon's power reached its zenith. He crushed Prussia at the twin battles of Jena and Auerstedt in 1806, occupying Berlin. He defeated the Russians again at Friedland. He was the master of Europe. He redrew the map of the continent at will, placing his brothers and marshals on the thrones of new kingdoms in Spain, Italy, and Germany. But Britain remained defiant, financing his enemies and safe behind its moat. Unable to invade, Napoleon decided to wage economic war. In 1806, he inaugurated the Continental System, a continent-wide embargo designed to bankrupt Britain by banning its goods from all French-controlled territory. But it was a double-edged sword. It hurt European economies as much as it hurt Britain's, breeding resentment and led to widespread smuggling. To enforce this leaky blockade, Napoleon was drawn into a series of disastrous decisions. The first was in 1808. To force Portugal to comply, he sent troops through Spain. He then betrayed his Spanish allies, deposed their king, and placed his own brother, Joseph, on the Spanish throne. He expected the Spanish people to accept their new ruler. He was catastrophically wrong. The Spanish rose up in a brutal, nationwide revolt. This was not a war of pitched battles, but of guerrilla, or little war, a savage cycle of ambush, reprisal, and atrocity that Napoleon would later call the Spanish ulcer. It would tie down hundreds of thousands of his best troops for years, a constant drain of blood and treasure from which his empire would never fully recover. 16 to 1930. The second and most fatal consequence of the Continental System was the breakdown of his alliance with Russia. Tsar Alexander I, under pressure from his nobility, reopened trade with Britain. For Napoleon, this was an act of personal and strategic betrayal he could not tolerate. He made the fateful decision to bring Russia to heel through overwhelming force. In the summer of 1812, he assembled the largest European army ever seen, the Grande Armée. Over 600,000 men from every corner of his empire marching east. But the Russians refused to play his game. They denied him the decisive battle he craved, adopting a scorched earth strategy: retreat, destroy supplies, and let the vastness of Russia and its brutal winter do the fighting for them. After the bloody but inconclusive Battle of Borodino, Napoleon entered Moscow, expecting the Tsar to sue for peace. Instead, he found a ghost city. And then the city began to burn. Set alight by Russian arsonists, Moscow was consumed by a firestorm, destroying the army's shelter and any remaining hope of supply. Forced to retreat in the depths of the Russian winter, the Grande Armée disintegrated. Starvation, frostbite, and relentless Cossack raids reduced it to a frozen, starving rabble. Of the 600,000 who invaded, fewer than 100,000 staggered out of Russia. It was a demographic and military catastrophe of apocalyptic proportions. 1930 to 2400. The Russian disaster broke the myth of Napoleon's invincibility. Europe smelled blood. A sixth coalition formed, and the war became a war for liberation. In October 1813, at the Titanic Battle of Leipzig, also known as the Battle of the Nations, Napoleon was decisively defeated by the combined Allied armies. The Allies invaded France. In April 1814, with Paris occupied, Napoleon was forced to abdicate. The victors exiled him to the tiny Mediterranean island of Elba. The old Bourbon monarchy was restored in France. The statesmen of Europe gathered at the Congress of Vienna to put the world back together. It seemed the